Well, good morning, everybody. We'll go ahead and start now that the clock on the back of the wall is officially gone to 8 o'clock. I'd like to welcome each of our witnesses to our hearing this morning on enterprise resource planning systems, the implementation efforts. In all of our previous hearings, regardless of the topic, ERP systems are always an integral part of the discussion, whether the discussion centered around the skills needed within the management workforce, accountability of assets, or the controls needed to prevent potential Anti-Deficiency Act violations. So it's fitting that the panel today has a separate hearing on the Department of Defense enterprise resource planning systems. Today we'll examine the scope of the ERP efforts and the status of the implementation of the ERPs and their ability to improve the Department's financial management. According to DOD, the successful implementation of the ERPs is a key element to addressing long-standing weaknesses in financial management and achieving audit readiness. Yet GAO has reported over the years that the Department has not effectively employed acquisition management controls to ensure the ERPs deliver the promised capabilities on time and within budget. GAO has also reported that delays in the successful implementation of ERPs have extended the use of existing systems and continued the funding of these legacy systems longer than was planned. The Department of Defense OIG noted in its testimony before the panel in September that the development, implementation, and effectiveness of these ERP systems are questionable at this point. With billions of taxpayer dollars at stake, it's critical that the Department of Defense take the necessary actions to ensure that ERPs are successfully implemented. Secretary of Defense directed the Department to move up the audit readiness date of the Statement of Budgetary Resources from 2017 to 2014. However, certain of the ERPs are not scheduled to be fully deployed until near or during 2017. In order to meet the 2014 deadline, the Department will the Department move up this question? Will the Department move up the ERP deployment dates, make enhancements to the existing legacy systems, improve manual controls, or some combination of the three? Also, will the DOD need additional resources for these efforts? We'll be interested in getting some insight today from the Department of Defense's approach to accomplishing this goal. One of the key responsibilities of the Department of Defense Deputy CMO and the military department CMOs and their respective deputies is to support business system modernization efforts in a manner that synchronizes these efforts with the financial improvement activities of the reporting entities. This becomes all the more important as DOD works toward achieving audit readiness of the SBR by 2014 while also keeping on track to achieve auditability for the full set of financial statements by 2017. I want to thank our witnesses for coming today. We have with us today the Honorable Elizabeth McGrath, Deputy Chief Management Officer, Department of Defense, Mark Lewis, Deputy Chief Management Officer, United States Army, Eric Fanning, Deputy Undersecretary of the Navy and Deputy Chief Management Officer for the United States Navy, David Tillotson III, Deputy Chief Management Officer for the United States Air Force, and Asif Khan, Director of Financial Management Assurance, GAO. Rob, any comments you would like to make before we start?
Well, good morning, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, my colleagues, and to the panel this morning. We really appreciate the seriousness and devotion that members of this panel have given to this joint enterprise. You've all contributed in a very valuable way already, and we're anxious to hear from you this morning. The problem with the enterprise systems is the best case study as to why we need auditable financial statements. We spent a lot of money, a lot of time, very mixed results, and we really can't quite figure out why. Now, people have theories and they have ideas, but one of the reasons we can't really quite figure out why is because the data that would lead us to the conclusions as to why we've had trouble aren't themselves reliable because we don't have a system that can generate the right data. It's a classic chicken and egg problem. You can't figure out why we couldn't get the enterprise systems right until you have a system that tells you what happened. And you can't have a system that tells you what happened until you get the enterprise systems right. So I'm glad that we have identified the problem. I'm quite confident that the men and women that we have working on solving the problem have very high skills and very good intentions and are very devoted to the cause. So we're glad to hear from you this morning. But if several of the panel members have said a number of times, how do I explain to people back in my district what we're trying to do here and what the problem is? And the way I look at boiling this down to its most simplistic form is that over the last decade or so, I guess longer, the taxpayers have spent billions of dollars to collapse dozens or hundreds of systems that aren't compatible into 10, that work. And we're not quite there yet, and there's a lot of bumps in the road. And they would be astonished at that. They wouldn't be very happy about that, and I don't think anybody here is either. So our collective mission is to figure out where we are, how to get to where we need to be, and I think our job as members of Congress is to give you the tools and resources to get you there. So I look forward to hearing the testimony this morning and asking questions, and I thank you, Mr. Chairman, for calling the hearing.
Thanks, Rob. Appreciate that. Ms. McGrath, your opening statement.
Good morning. Chairman Conaway, Congressman Andrews, other members of the panel, thank you for the opportunity to return to this panel and discuss the role of the enterprise resource planning systems in achieving our audit readiness goals at DOD. Secretary of Defense Panetta recently highlighted the importance of auditability for the department. He discussed it earlier this month in his testimony before the full House Armed Services Committee, also in his October 13th policy memorandum to the department, which mandated the acceleration of certain aspects of the Department's Financial Improvement Audit Readiness Plan in order to ensure we achieve the congressionally mandated audit of 2017. He noted auditability is a goal every commander, manager, functional specialist must understand and embrace to improve efficiency and accountability. DOD has made substantial progress over the last 2 years to improve its business processes, financial controls, workforce, and defense business systems. But a significant amount of work still lies ahead. Implementation of systems, to include ERPs, is an important component of our progress, as the Chairman noted. As Secretary Panetta said, while the Department's systems do tell us where we are spending taxpayer funds, we do not yet have the details and controls necessary in place to pass an audit. The Secretary's mandate underscores the partnership between the Undersecretary of Defense Comptroller's Office, my office, the Military Department Chief Management Officers, and the Department's other functional business owners, all of which will be required to achieve our audit goals. We consistently work together to ensure that we are effectively synchronizing our broader business improvement efforts with the Department's audit readiness goal. It is a part of our broader business conversation. We're improving our business systems environment by implementing ERPs, modernizing legacy systems when there's a business case that supports it, and certainly sunsetting legacy systems not aligned with our business objectives. The design principles within an ERP directly enable key elements of auditability, such as enforcing process and execution standardization among implementing organizations, managing consolidated business data into a single repository that allows centralized access control and handles transactions from an end-to-end perspective. As Congressman Andrews noted, it's all about the data. Enabling traceability of transactions, documenting repeatable processes and procedures, and demonstrating compliance with laws, regulations, and standards, all part of a broader business conversation, end-to-end processes, which systems play a role. Implementing ERPs requires sustained commitment from our senior leaders and often requires, I would say always requires, change of processes and policies to achieve successful implementation. We have placed significant emphasis on orienting our business environment, utilizing our business enterprise architecture, defining end-to-end processes that support our audit goals like procure to pay and budget to report. We are improving the usability and implementation of the architecture, because if an architecture isn't usable, no one will use it. Very important for us, again, documenting the processes, understanding the standards, and internal controls. Finally, we are also improving our approach to acquiring and implementing our business IT systems. Our new acquisition model for defense business systems, called the Business Capabilities Lifecycle, is in use today for a growing number of programs across the department. It aligns requirements, investment, and acquisition processes under an integrated governance framework and focuses on incremental delivery of capability within 12 to 18 months. Achieving auditability across the department not only requires successful modernization of systems, but that we apply a consistent level of process controls across our organization and functional areas. DOD leadership understands this and is committed to achieving our audit goal. Thank you again for having me here today.
All right. Thanks, Mr. McGrath. Mr. Lewis.
Chairman Conaway, Congressman Andrews, members of the panel, thank you for the opportunity to testify today regarding the Army's efforts to implement its enterprise resource planning systems and other actions related to audit readiness. This is an important topic with regard to the Department of Defense's effort to achieve auditability by FY 2017, and I'm honored to have that opportunity to represent the Army before your panel. The Army believes it has set the conditions towards achieving auditability. At this point, we believe that the Army will be able to comply with both the interim target specified in the FY20 National Defense Authorization Act, which states for 2015, and to assert audit readiness by FY 2017. We have increased leader involvement and emphasis from the Secretary of Defense through the Secretary of the Army and the Undersecretary of the Army in his role as the Chief Management Officer. The Secretary of Defense most recently indicated his intent with his 13 October memo directing the Department to be able to assert audit readiness for the statement of budgeted resources by 2014. We are currently in the 60-day period for review of our plans as he directed. The Army has implemented enterprise governance over business processes and systems involving all the key members of the Army staff and Army commands. These forums bring together the experts in manpower, personnel, logistics, facilities, and intelligence, in addition to, of course, the financial management and comptroller personnel and functions. Under the guidance and direction provided by the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Financial Management and Comptroller, we have created and implemented the Army's Financial Improvement Plan, coined FIP, which is the Army's roadmap to audit readiness and ensures alignment with the OSD Financial Improvement and Audit Readiness FIRE guidance. The Army is developing and fielding 4 ERPs, which will greatly support audit readiness, as has been mentioned, by providing traceability of actions from source to statement, using documented and disciplined processes, and demonstrating compliance with laws, directives, and standards. Using our business governance forums, we are conducting end-to-end process mapping and continuous process improvement to optimize our business processes and identify gaps and redundancies in our systems. These actions are continuous and ongoing efforts. With your support and assistance, the Army has provided adequate funding to our ERPs and remaining legacy systems for development and sustainment. Finally, we have established a culture with ongoing training in business case management, cost containment, to help ensure that we use our resources efficiently and effectively. Good stewardship of the taxpayers' dollars is non-negotiable. Being financially auditable requires input from many financial feeder systems. However, the ERPs are the glue that supports the financial auditability. G Fibs will consolidate the management and reporting of our general funds and assets across the Army enterprise. G Fibs is on track to be deployed to 160 locations later this year and will replace over 106 legacy systems when they are audited and certified for removal. G Fibs also provides for real property accountability. Next, the Global Combat Systems Support, Army. GCSS Army is presently undergoing initial operating tests at Fort Bliss, Texas. This is the first location where both G Fibs and GCSS Army are deployed jointly and offers us the opportunity to test the financial interfaces between the two ERPs in a live environment. GCSS Army contains the master database for Army equipment and will enhance asset transparency and visibility, a key aspect of our 2017 auditability goals. And right now, initial indications from that test that things are going as expected well. LMP is fully deployed within the Army Materiel Command. In December of this year, we will complete the software upgrades to LMP that will update the financial functionality and bring that system into compliance with FISCOM standards. LMP contains the ledger for the Army working capital and should be ready for an independent audit evaluation later this year. Finally, the Integrated Personnel Pay System, Army, IPS Army. Our Integrated Personnel Pay System of the future is in its beginning stages. The first increment is to create a consolidated database that brings together the military personnel information from our active duty, United States Army Reserve, and Army National Guard soldiers. This database will be the single consolidated source for military pay and personnel and will be delivered by 2013, the database. While IPS Army will continue to be developed for several years, when fully deployed, it will be able to calculate military pay directly. For my part, I bring over 40 years of continuous service to the United States Army as both as a commissioned officer and now as a senior civilian for 10 years. I've had numerous staff jobs on the Army, Deputy G1, Deputy G3, and now the DCMO. I look forward to your questions. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mr. Lewis. Mr. Lewis, Mr. Fanning.
Mr. Chairman, Congressman Andrews, members of the panel, thank you for the opportunity to discuss the role of ERPs in supporting the Department of the Navy's efforts to achieve financial auditability. I'm particularly honored to be testifying before the committee where I started my professional career almost 20 years ago to the day. Financial auditability is one of the top priorities of the Department, as set out in the Department of the Navy's strategic objectives, signed out annually by the Secretary, the Commandant of the Marine Corps, and the Chief of Naval Operations. Auditability is also one of the 4 main focus areas of the Department's Business Transformation Plan, which is administered by my office. And, as Ms. Commons, our Assistant Secretary for Financial Management and Comptroller, has already testified, auditability is a key part of the performance measures for any leader who has any role, large or small, in achieving this goal, including my boss, the Undersecretary of the Navy. The Department of Navy's Financial Improvement Plan timeline is also in compliance with Secretary Panetta's directive to accelerate a validated statement of budgetary resources. The Department had already planned to assert its SBR by the end of fiscal year 2013. And we are currently reviewing our strategy to see where we can accelerate our plan in order to mitigate any risk resulting from the new schedule. Of course, we are here today to answer questions on how our investments in ERPs are supporting our efforts to achieve auditability. While the Department is committed to achieving auditability in the legacy environment, the deployment of ERPs makes this goal easier to reach, more affordable, and is critical to sustaining any audit-ready environment. The Department has 3 IT efforts that contribute to audit readiness success. The first, Navy ERP, provides improved financial discipline, improved accuracy with automated entry of key data fields, and an audit trail associating users and electronic documents with transactions. It provides a single system for budgeting, funds availability, and execution across all major acquisition commands. In addition to financial controls, it results in a single data source with common data structures, standardized processes, and improved compliance across these commands. The second is our future personnel and pay solution, which is on track to better support our financial improvement plan after reset the effort in order to reprioritize the business problems it was developed to fix. Instead of a big bang solution delivered in a long-term future date, we have reworked the plan to develop incremental capability so as to address our most pressing problems first. Financial improvements are among the highest priorities in this new construct, and the financial management community is much more integrated into this effort than it was before. The third is the Marine Corps Global Combat Support System. It's currently deployed to 7,700 users and is demonstrating business value in several areas. For example, the time to first supply status, a primary measure for logistics responsiveness, has been reduced to from over 24 hours to an average of 1.5 hours. Additionally, order shipment times have been reduced by 29.1%, and maintenance repair cycle time has been reduced 48.5%. But systems and technology alone, of course, will not get us to clean audit statements. It is just as easy to automate bad processes as good ones, and the work of improving our processes, standardizing our data, and enforcing our controls is where we'll meet success. And it is in these efforts that the DCMOs and the comptrollers are most closely aligned. Those goals the financial management community needs to accomplish in order to achieve financial improvement are in complete sync with the steps the business transformation community needs to take in order to make our business operations as efficient and effective as possible in support of the warfighter and as good stewards of taxpayer dollars. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Fanning. Mr. Tillotson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Andrews, and members of the panel. It's a privilege to be here today to talk to you about the Air Force's ERP systems. I'll talk about the Army systems, too, and their impact on our progress towards auditability and financial readiness. The implementation of the enterprise resource programs, which my colleagues have already discussed, is an essential implementation step in achieving the audit readiness goals. Having said that, the Air Force leadership recognizes that IT systems alone do not actually get us to audit readiness. We also have to address management challenges, process controls, and the kinds of things, Mr. Chairman, that you addressed in your opening question. For the Air Force in particular, that will become a very relevant question because, as this panel is well aware, the Air Force schedules for achieving audit readiness tended toward the end of the objective period. So the goal that Secretary Panetta has recently set will cause us to fundamentally relook at our strategies going forward. And the result of that will be to not only consider what we're doing with the ERP deployments, but we're going to have to go back and reconsider legacy remediation as well as increased process controls. And that work is underway as part of the 60-day planning cycle that the Department's, the DOD Comptroller has laid in place. I've submitted to the panel in my written testimony a summary of the 3 Air Force ERPs that span financial, supply chain, logistics, and human resource management. Those systems are the Defense Enterprise and Accounting Management System, DEAMS, the Expeditionary Combat Support System, ECSS, and Air Force Integrated Personnel and Pay System. Deems will replace 9 legacy systems. It is operational at Scott Air Force Base in its first instance. It's actually achieved its second end-of-year closeout, much better, I will report, than the previous years. More importantly, from a mission execution point of view and a benefits point of view, it's begun to point to the kinds of things that the GAO has suggested we should be finding all the time as we improve audit controls. We have reduced our interest penalty payments, which were in fact substantially reduced previously, but we've maintained that record with the new deployment. More importantly, we've highlighted overaged, unmatched disbursements and delinquent account receivable, all of which is good financial management practice and would improve cash flow within the department. So we are seeing the benefits, at least at that base, and certainly to expand that out would make that more significant. ECSS, our logistic and supply chain system, is targeted to underpin a wholesale transformation of our logistics, supply chain, and maintenance processes. This is a very ambitious project. It's scheduled to replace 240 legacy core systems and ranges from depot-level activities, wholesale supply, down through flight line maintenance kinds of activities. Having said that, we've recently undergone some programmatic issues with the ECSS program. We reported to Congress at the beginning of the year a change in this program. We have since had to address changes since that report because of program performance. So on a positive note, we've implemented the kinds of management direction that the GAO has suggested back in their November 2010 report for providing better oversight of the ERP program execution. The bad news is when you have bad execution, then you have to actually go back and adjust your plan. So we're in the process of doing that. Bluntly, the replan for that is still underway. We report back to the department by next month, by November. We would be reporting back out more publicly in the December time period about a way ahead for the ECSS program. The integrated personnel and pay system will integrate 105 personnel and pay processes. We have mapped those quite extensively. We're actually in the early phases of that program. We're in the process of generating the request for proposal that's due to go out here in the next 30 days or so, and we're anticipating a contract award on that program sometime in the spring, summer of next year, and that's on schedule. So that's not a revised schedule. That's the current schedule for that program. It will replace ultimately 9 legacy systems. Within the Air Force, the Chief Management Officer, the Undersecretary, and the CFO partner closely on all auditability goals and business transformation goals. And in fact, at my level, I co-chair panels with Dr. Moore, our CFO, and recently in our audit acceleration process, it will be me and one of his key directors who will co-chair the acceleration process. So we are coupled at the hip from our point of view on the auditability goals. And I thank you for the time.
Thank you, Mr. Tilson. Mr. Khan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Andrews, members of the panel. Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here today to provide a perspective on the status of DOD's business modernization. Effective implementation of enterprise resource planning systems is a key in DOD's efforts to reach auditability. To be audit ready and to be audit ready by fiscal year 2017, and now, as we have discussed, to meet the interim goal of preparing an auditable statement of budgetary resources by a new department-wide date of 2014, as Secretary Panetta recently announced before the full Armed Services Committee. Today, I will summarize 3 conditions holding back DOD from achieving its goals in ERP implementation. First, I will discuss the problems in scheduling and in estimating costs. Second, gaps in functions the systems are able to perform. And finally, a lack of compliance with standards. My statement today is based primarily on our prior work. First, scheduling and costs. In October 2010, we reported on 10 ERPs that DOD identified as critical in transforming its business operations. Our review of DOD's data found delays in implementation of these systems ranging from 2 to 12 years. 5 systems had incurred cost increases, totaling an estimated $6.9 billion. In our detailed analysis of 4 ERPs, we found that the development programs for these systems had omitted certain elements of risk analysis called for in scheduling and cost guidelines issued by DOD GAO OMB. The DOD IG reported in 2011 that in estimating $2.4 billion in additional costs for implementing its general ledger ERP, G Fibs, Army had not identified all the projects, requirements, and costs. Had they all been included, the costs might have been significantly higher. Unreliable schedules can increase costs with additional time and rework needed before the system is fully functional. And as costs for ERP rise above estimates, funding is extended for the legacy systems that cannot yet be replaced. Second, gap in functionality. We found significant gaps between needed ERP functions and those delivered. In November 2010, we reported that Army's Logistics Modernization Program, LMP, had not fully developed the capability that LMP needed to perform certain basic logistical tasks. For example, maintaining accountability for ammunition. Officials at the Joint Munitions and Lethality Lifecycle Management Command told us, in contrast to the system LMP was slated to replace, LMP did not enable staff to record the shipping, receiving, or transfer of ammunition to another site. Army, to compensate, had planned to hire 172 additional personnel to perform manual data entry until the software could be modified to perform the required functions. In preliminary results from an ongoing review, we also found problems in Army G Fibs and Air Force's general ledger system DEEMS. For example, financial personnel had to devise manual workarounds because of deficiencies in ERP's ability to accept data directly from other systems, including 2/3 of the data from an invoicing and receiving systems. Such manual workarounds are cumbersome, error-prone, expensive, and ultimately not sustainable. Army and Air Force officials told us that they have plans to address the issues that we raised. Finally, lack of compliance with U.S. Standard General Ledger. To be efficient and effective as a financial management tool, an ERP must be able to process information according to accounting and financial reporting standards, a basic requirement for consistent recording of financial information and the preparation of financial reports. But in November 2010, the DOD IG found that after more than 10 years in development and a cost of $1.1 billion, Army LMP system was not compliant with the U.S. Standard General Ledger. For example, the Standard General Ledger contains 11 budgetary codes related to contract authority for working capital funds, but LMP contained only 3. As such, as a result, it was not recording all the data needed for the statement of budgetary resources. With a history of slow-moving improvement programs that fall short of their goals, DOD now faces the additional challenge of responding to urgent fiscal demands and serious deadlines. DOD leadership has taken the encouraging step towards positive change, but in order for DOD to achieve its goals, it's critical that leadership sustain its commitment to progress and its involvement and oversight to ensure that capable systems and effective processes are established throughout the department. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Andrews, members of the panel, this concludes my prepared statement. I'll be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Khan. We'll start our questioning with Mr. Todd for 5 minutes. Todd, or Mr. Young, excuse me, Todd.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to all of our panelists for being here this morning, bright and early. I think we will, I'm certainly hopeful we will have all the leadership at the highest levels in the Pentagon, especially with Mr. Secretary's recent indication that we're going to accelerate this whole process. And I know that that will probably be a great point of focus for this working group in the future, trying to figure out the implications that has on all aspects of this larger effort. So we'll look forward to that. Ms. McGrath, I know that many years of effort and millions of dollars were invested in an effort to put together a department-wide integrated personnel and payment system, and that effort wasn't successful. Ultimately, there were some complications, some challenges, and instead the military services pursued their own integrated personnel and payment systems. First, why did that effort fail? And then secondarily, what sort of lessons were learned, and how might those lessons help us as we move forward in developing these ERP systems? And after you're done, if anyone else would like to add, that would be welcome. Thank you.
So the system that you're referring to, the Defense Integrated Military Human Resources System, commonly referred to as DIMERS, within the department, I say provides an opportunity for us to learn many lessons. And I think a lot of the opening statements, or you heard some of those lessons actually being conveyed in the opening statements. The challenges that were identified in Dimer's implementation started with data. To Mr. Andrews' comments earlier, all about the understanding the authoritative source of the data, how clean is it, who defines it, so that we had consistency not only within the components but across the defense enterprise. We are not standard across the defense enterprise in the military pay. The way we define certain things like leave, and it is just not standard. And so what Dimer's was also looking to do is not only pay, but achieve standardization of data, processes. We don't have consistent processes in this space, and so in order to successfully implement a solution, an IT solution, the fundamental aspects of both process and data had to be achieved. And I think that, as that system in Army was the first service identified for implementation, and we learned through testing that, the Army had a lot of challenges in their data, and I'll say have heeded that lesson. And so their first aspect of their integrated purse-pay solution is establishing the authoritative data within the Army that will feed, I'll say, the rest of the business processes. And so I would say not only did we learn it, but it's being applied in the Army's integrated purse-pay solution. Governance too.
Could I stop you there just to clarify? I was a management consultant for a period of time, and I tend to focus on business process redesign because the whole ERP systems was an area a bit abstruse for me. But I know the two are very much related. And one challenge to adopting a department-wide system, it sounds like you're saying, was the difficulty of getting the different services, say, to recognize different pay categories by the same names, or to change certain processes. Is that incorrect?
So it's processes. Again, there's with good reason we execute differently across the military departments, and so to then bring all that into a single solution adds complexity and challenge. And so the getting a standard definition of an end-to-end process, and there are many within an integrated purse-pay solution, because you're dealing with how do I calculate entitlements to how do I pay. Right. And so it's processes across the services. It's also then the governance required to actually enable those process definitions to happen cross-functionally, if you will. You need the personnel folks and the pay to then decide, how do we come up with a single end-to-end process to effectively, execute this business.
Okay. So, maybe we'll talk offline here. I think my time has expired, but I'd be interested in some of the lessons learned, how you're going to apply them to future success. So, thank you.
Mr. Andrews, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Khan. The GAO looked at the 10 ERPs, and my understanding is that 6 of them had delays ranging from 2 to 12 years in implementation. Does that mean the other 4 were on schedule?
Yes, sir. At least as of last year, from the information we were provided, the other 4 were.
So this is at the 2010 report that
Correct.
you did.
Yes.
And then on cost, that 5 of the 10 were generating cost overruns aggregating to $6.9 billion.
That's correct.
Does that mean the other 5 were within budget?
Well, we didn't have information for the others.
So we're not sure about
We're not sure about those
Okay.
ones.
I just want to look at G Fibs for a minute. Where Mr. Lewis, I'm not picking on G Fibs, but there's frankly more data about it, so I just want to kind of walk through this. The history of G Fibs is that it starts in 2004, right, Mr. Khan? That's,
Correct.
When was it originally supposed to be fully fieldable and implemented? Mr. Lewis, do you know? I know you weren't there to believe me. I understand you walked into this story in the middle, not the beginning, so I get that. But when was it supposed to be done?
I don't know that date. I do know it was some years before that.
Before now?
Or before.
It started in 2004,
Yeah,
right? That's
right.
when the, okay. Mr. Khan, do you know? Maybe you could just supplement the record for us as the time
I will do that.
How much of the $6.9 billion in cost overruns is attributable to the G Fibs?
That was one of the systems where we didn't have data, the cost overrun data for G Fibs at that point in time.
Okay.
That doesn't mean that there aren't any cost overruns.
Well, let's look at the
No.
projection of it, though. If I understand this correctly, that the GAO report says that there's an estimate of a $2.4 billion cost to finish the program, is
Correct.
that right? But you have some doubts about whether that's accurate. What's the cause of those doubts?
Because not all the aspects what goes into building up a cost were considered when those estimates were developed. And I'm reporting this information per what the IG had reported earlier on this year.
If you had to give a professional judgment as to what you think the cost will turn out to be, you think it's higher than 2.4?
I would imagine so, just based on some of the problems that I've highlighted in my oral statement.
Do you have an opinion about how much higher it's going to be?
I would not guess at this point in time.
When are you next scheduled to go in and examine that program?
As part of our ongoing work, we continue to look at these systems. We will be following up on our prior recommendations.
Now, Mr. Lewis, as someone who served both in uniform and the civilian sector, thank you. I would be interested, if we could wind the clock back to before G Fibs got started, knowing what you know about where we are now in terms of delay and potential cost overruns, how would you do it differently? If you were working with a blank sheet of paper, and could take us from the beginning of this idea, of this enterprise system, where we are now, what would you do differently?
Mr. Andrews, thank you for that question. With these systems, as all systems, and it's been alluded to and referred to in some of the statements here this morning, starting with a good requirement. You have to get your requirements down, and what do you want that system to do?
In this case, was the requirement over-inclusive, under-inclusive? What did we do wrong on the requirement in this case?
Anecdotal from this conversation for me, I'm not on paper, but we didn't have all the requirements, all the interfaces. Remember, our ERPs in the Army were all started at a different time, mainly for functional purposes. And the good news is the three of them are SAP-based, and so now, later years.
So we were under-inclusive in our requirement process. We didn't ask for all the stuff that we needed. Mr. Khan, is that part of the reason why we have the present problems that you observed about this manual entry of data that I read about, which seems to be it must be an enormous hassle for the men and women work. Is that the reason why we have that problem, you think?
I mean, that's part of the issue that we had highlighted, that the requirements up front have not been correctly ascertained. So once the development progresses, additional requirements come to light.
Now, Mr. Lewis, this is not a rhetorical question, but why do you think we got the requirements wrong? How did we mess that up?
Well, these systems, as you know, are very complex, and nobody has all the knowledge on this, and they're incrementally developed. And as we rolled them out, we got, thank goodness, we got most of it right. But there are that around the fringes that everybody talks here, and we just have to pull those back in as we go along. But and things grow over time. Technology changed over time, and so the more is possible.
My time has expired. I would just mention to the Chairman the work we've done together on procurement, that this is an echo that we're hearing this morning, that the good work the GAO has done on cost overruns on major weapon systems generally, in my view, the main part of that story is getting the requirements wrong consistently. And we all blame the contractors, and sometimes they deserve it. But sometimes we need to blame ourselves because we keep changing the requirements on people. It tends to create these cost overruns. So if I could do one thing, I'll answer my own question. If I could do one thing in this area, it would be to figure out how we could all get the requirements consistent and right more often in this process. I think it would help us. Thank you.
Thanks, gentlemen. Mr. Riggle, 5 minutes.
Good morning and welcome to everyone. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding the hearing, and good to see my colleagues this morning. It's a very, very big topic, and some of my question is more to help me just simply understand the issue as much as it is to maybe provide guidance here. But Ms. McGrath, could you help me to understand if we had, for example, a matrix chart, and on the vertical column was the different functions, for example, transportation, supply, maintenance, engineering, payroll, and then across the top of the matrix was the different services. Could you tell me where there would be alignment, for example, on compensation? Is there a common vendor? have we tried to seek a common vendor to help with compensation, almost specialized in that, or is the work of these ERPs and our vendors more by service? And I'm trying to understand the degree to which the DOD has sought commonality between different functions and vendors.
So I think we're more trying to define common standards across the enterprise and then acquire solutions that will help enable implementation of the common standards, vice buying one solution that has standards embedded in it that we then all use. Because then that allows for competition, certainly if the department is defining its business standards and processes and then publishing those in a way that vendors can.
And it makes sense, as big as DOD is, that we have certainly more than one vendor helping us with pay issues, for example, across different services. But then that leads to what degree are we seeking like best practices from one, if we're having real success, this company really has got this down, they're doing very well. Do you all meet together on a regular basis to say, hey, this company X is doing a great job for us, they're on track, they've got a low-cost solution?
So certainly we use past performance and data in awarding contracts, but I think the lessons learned in sharing, especially in these big ERP programs, is we do have venues where we bring all the ERP program managers together to identify lessons learned in terms of implementation. There's network issues, there's standards issues. We certainly understand the measures we're putting in place, not only with the vendor but with ourselves in terms of best practices and lessons learned. We're adopting those, embedding them into the oversight, not necessarily looking at one particular vendor's performance.
Well, I've been impressed by really the quality of the people that I've interacted with in my short time here, and I'm sure you're doing that. I've learned in life that you really can't over-communicate, and getting people together, sharing best practices is just a terrific way to improve performance. So I just encourage you to pursue that. In the 2 minutes that I have left, Mr. Khan, I wanted to shift over to you, sir, and to ask you, I wanted to follow up on some comments that were made by the ranking member, Congressman Andrews, and related to some of the ERPs are on track, a few aren't. Let's talk about, I wish I had time to talk about the successes. Let's talk about the ones that are having trouble. Is there any commonality among those? Is there a company that's given us a bumpier time than others? Could you explain that to us? Give us just a quick overview.
The commonality primarily is in requirements, requirements management, collecting requirements on fronts, and how those requirements and then actually develop into the system itself. So that is the...
So it's more our side. I mean, it's more the government. Is that, I want to make sure I understand your point here. Is it more that we have not been clear? It's almost like a change order on a house. You start remodeling your house and the builder gives you a certain date and you go, no, I really want to do this, and you start doing change orders and you're off track.
That's correct, but it's hard to distinguish whether it's the government's issue or the contractor issue, because for the most part, teams usually are integrated to be able to collect this information. But I was just answering your question that one of the major issues that we, when we were doing our work, we found was the upfront requirement collection was a problem.
Okay. Well, in the 20 or so seconds that I have left, I just would encourage all of you to to reward those who are doing good work and to hold accountable those who are not. And that has to be brought into our procurement process, evaluation of vendors. And as time goes on, I'd like for us to explore and see and identify those companies that are not performing as well and understand why. Thank you. I'll yield back.
Thank you, gentlemen. Mr. Ryan, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just kind of want to piggyback a little bit on where the discussion just went as far as it sounds like the crux of it is incentives, or can be incentives, whether you're talking about the scheduling and the costs, like Mr. Khan was talking about, or the lack of compliance. Can you help us identify some carrots and possibly some sticks that we need to look at in order to expedite this, especially when you're talking about the scheduling and the costs. You know, as we're moving into austerity, I guess, and cuts within the military and every other program across the board, I think it's important for us to know early on what the exact numbers are. So, Mr. Khan, can you give us some advice from your vantage point going through this with a fine-tooth comb on what some carrots would be and what some possible sticks would be? And then, Ms. McGrath, too, if you could comment on that.
Yes, sir. One of the key aspects is additional oversight, especially as far as investment management is concerned, to make sure that a particular project, especially ERP development, doesn't go forward till they are meeting the initial requirements or the requirements of a particular phase. That's where governance and oversight becomes critical.
What would the numbers look like? What investments would we have to make into that kind of oversight? How many people would we need, for example?
I mean, that's hard for me to say. I think we have got the structure in place now with the CMOs at the various components itself. There's a governance structure in place under the leadership of the DCMO who are providing this oversight at this point in time. Other than that, I think as we go along, it'll be, I mean, just the results would speak for themselves, whether the projects are moving forward and what the results are.
So we have the manpower in place to be able to do this?
I cannot answer that question. We haven't looked into that.
I think someone else on the panel would like to comment on that.
I'd be happy to. So I think the shift over the last couple of years, in particular with all the tools that Congress has given us in terms of oversight and so architecture development, investment review boards, the chief management officer, legislation, and the business process reengineering have all helped in terms of enabling better execution of these programs. Another shift that has happened is that previously it was just the acquisition team, the acquisition oversight, the service acquisition or component acquisition executives looking at the, is the program on doing cost, schedule, and performance. With the introduction of the CMOs, and in particular, my role with the acquisition oversight for these programs, coupled with the investment reviews, you actually have everybody at the table who needs to be at the table to understand the impact of this particular investment. So you've got all the functional areas represented. You have the corporate business, the folks at the table here represented to say, how does this thing fit into my broader business conversation? So I actually do think if you looked over the last 2 years as opposed to the last 10, I would hope that you would see actually more implementation of systems, delivering capability closer to on time and at cost than they had been previously, because we better understand, the implementation aspects from a much broader perspective. Another lesson learned, frankly, to get back to a couple of questions, is the requirements piece. I mean, that is the thing that sort of bites us every time. And part of what we've learned is we over-require. We think this is the only time we're ever going to have a shot at putting all the requirements in, so the programs are big and complex. And part of the business capabilities life cycle, this different acquisition approach, if you will, to IT and business, is to say, okay, we know you want sort of this big thing, but can you chunk it such that we can, talk about it in smaller terms and deliver it in smaller, understanding that it's incomplete when we first deliver it, but it's part of the broader plan. And I think part of the Better Buying Power initiative that AT&L and Dr. Carter have been promoting, and part of the broader business, is to figure out, how do we structure the contracts using the right balance of, incentive fees and firm fixed price versus time materials. I mean, we sometimes issue a firm fixed price contract when the requirements aren't yet baked enough to really communicate to the vendor what it is we want. And so I think it is the balance of, I'm going to say, all those things that we're really embedding into this entire conversation. And so you'll see changes in the way that some of the contracts, ECSS is actually a very good example from a contracting perspective. And so, yes, I do think we have the oversight, and I would hope that if we did look from a shorter term, that the progress would be much, much better than it has been from a 10-year cycle. And I do think that it's every aspect that is required to make it better.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, gentlemen. Again, thanks everybody for coming this morning. I want to make sure we try to get as much information we can. Talk about an idiot statement. Mr. Lewis, the G Fibs and the rollout, one of the things that we've been told is that legacy data, or much of the data from the legacy systems, won't necessarily be converted into the G Fib systems for some period of time. Can you help us understand is that obviously planned decision, but from a management standpoint, a cost standpoint, is that the most effective way to manage that transition over time?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. We would like that transition, as this was the first year that we closed out with using G Fibs. We'd like all that to be seamless and electronic, but there are some interfaces that need a little extra help, need some manpower to make that data move over. We got eyes on target. That's one of those things, as Ms. McGrath said, large complex systems, as we get experience using these systems, we got to fix that. But yes, we would like to have it all be inputted into G Fibs, be resident in there, be manipulated in the system, and that also, I think,
but are you tracking? Is there enough pressure from the cost of maintaining legacy systems and that are extra to the system to make sure that you do in fact move everything as expeditiously as possible into G Fibs?
Well, most affirmative. In an era here of declining resources, everybody's after legacy systems. Lots of people, budgeters, programmers, those of us that are functional management types, and the people that run the systems, that the pressure is on there. We have them scheduled, and as soon as they're certified, or the system's certified they can handle it, we want to take the legacy and shut it down.
All right. Mr. Tilson, the stop order for your ECSS program, based on your comments, I was going to ask a question relative to that, but apparently you're going to have more information on that next month. One of the carrots in this thing are savings associated with doing things better, doing things quicker and faster, and you've got an estimate out there for almost $3 billion in savings over a 10-year period once these things are implemented. Present value of those savings gets smaller and smaller as that 10-year window gets beyond the 2017 date. Can you visit with us about where you are in terms of with the 2014 date and all those things? Can you get there by 2017?
So from a broad Air Force point of view, the 2017 date, as Dr. Morin reported, I think, to this panel some weeks ago, is a moderate risk date for the Air Force as a whole for the total audit readiness condition. For the statement of budgetary resource, we are aggressively looking now at what changes we need to make. As I indicated in my opening remarks, because of ECSS program performance, even before the 2014 mandate from Secretary Panetta, we were having to reconsider a mix of legacy process and ECSS deployment in order to stay on track to meet the audit goal even at 2017. So we will be doing more of that as we go forward. So bluntly, we're looking at all of the above, and we actually have done a very detailed deep dive on this.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Tilson. Ms. McGrath, given the things that are going on with the Air Force, where in that broad array of organization chart is the Office of Secretary responsibility for watching what the Air Force is doing and understanding what they're doing, watching what the Army is doing with respect to that? Is that your office that will be monitoring and helping us with the oversight? Where does that oversight lie within your system? With
the acquisition over milestone decision authority for all but the logistics systems resides with me. And then for the logistics systems like ECSS and some of the GCSSs that you've heard today, they're within AT&L. And then I run the subordinate body, but all of them come into the Investment Review Board. And so it's both the Investment Review Board and the acquisition oversight. So again, most of them are with me. The logistics systems are with AT&L. Okay. We've heard across the panels, several of these hearings, that performance evaluations next year will be is somewhat driven by success against getting this done.
is that there's a similar, and we're looking forward to seeing how that works. I want to hear your comments about what your perspective is on that. But is the responsibility for watching, for lack of a better phrase, Mr. Tillis and Mr. Lewis's efforts, is that a performance requirement with whoever that performance review, or whoever that investment review board is, or it is, because if the point is, if everybody's in charge of something, then nobody's in charge of it. And so comments first on the individual performance review standards, particularly within the system, on getting it into the details, but also on the folks who are watching it to make sure that they're held accountable for their role as well.
So there's the, I think as we testified when Mr. Hale and I were here last time, we ensure that audit readiness is part of the strategy of the department. It's in the strategic management plan that we just recently released, also in the department's organizational guidance, which establishes the priorities for the department, which are cascaded into performance plans, which is why it's important. So we have measures from a strategic perspective that cascade throughout the department. And then we report on those on a quarterly basis. How's it going with regard to, statement of budgetary resources or some of the fire, the milestones identified in the fire plan. And so institutionally, we have those baked in, which I think is extremely important. Also, we're looking at cost schedule and performance of these ERPs and also how they achieve the business goals. That is done through, I think, multiple governance bodies, not the least of which is the fire governance body that both Mr. Hale and I co-chair, and also from an acquisition perspective. Some of the things I just mentioned, do we have the right contract strategy and those kind of things. And so it's both the investment review, acquisition oversight, and the overarching total performance.
Okay.
It doesn't look, your face says I didn't answer your question.
Ms. McGrath, yeah. Part of it is just, it's, as you mentioned, baked into the system. If you looked at the organization chart, and we've had this conversation before with others, there's nobody in charge. But you have, of the whole package, other than Mr. Panetta. And I guess we'll just have to hold Mr. Panetta charge, because if you look at the way this bifurcated, you've got the audit responsibility going this direction, you've got ERBs under a different group of folks, and so I'm having a hard time figuring out who I need to hold accountable other than Mr. Panetta to make this thing work. And so there's a lot of folks who have a little piece of a bunch of it.
Well, I think that's both part of the challenge and the opportunity, is that achieving a clean audit is not just one person or one organization or one functional area's responsibility. It really does take the department.
I understand that part, but at any rate, we've got a few minutes left. We want to do another round, Mr. Andrews?
I do. More than a question, I have a suggestion, and that would be before the full committee begins its deliberations on next year's authorization bill, we should get this year's done first, but before we begin our deliberations on next year's authorization bill, I think it'd be helpful if the GAO would revisit its review of these 10 systems. So we would have in front of us.
Yeah, Mr. Khan, you didn't actually give it. You said you would do it. Is there something on the books right now to update your November 10 analysis?
No, not specifically. Okay. What I meant was that as part of our recommendation follow-up, we do.
I understand it, but you don't have a.
No, I do not.
Okay.
No.
I mean, I'd like us to be in a position when the full committee considers the FY13 authorization bill, that we have the current state of play with these 10 systems as to where they are, where they're going, so that any resources we need to add to try to make them succeed or subtract because they're not succeeding, we could make an intelligent decision about that. I mean, I come back to the beginning of this, that I think Secretary McGrath said this is the glue that holds this whole thing together. And, you know, we have some problems here. And I think in order for us to assess how to best address those problems, I think the committee would benefit from a current state of affairs as stated by the GAO before we get to the decision-making phase in next year's bill. So that would be my suggestion to the chairman if we could accomplish that.
All right. Anything? Well, thank you for coming this morning. You know, part of the oversight role is to not second guess and Monday morning quarterback too much And it's clear that, you know, if you look at it, a personnel system for the entire Department of Defense, you know, hindsight, that might have been, you know, clearly too big of a project to try to make happen, and busting it up into smaller pieces, you know, makes more sense, and we're doing those kinds of things. And so, you know, looking at the way, you know, you can see where the system department got to deciding, let's just do one. That makes, you know, it's kind of intuitive to start with. But looking at a requirement that that the standard general ledger be a piece of the, be one of the things that comes out of it. I mean, in the comments from Mr. Kahn made that the logistics management piece, LMP thing, didn't meet the standard general ledger issues on the front end. I don't know how you missed that one. So we're going to try to, you know, obviously that's water under the bridge, and our focus really is from where we are today, you know, going forward, unless there are some lessons to be learned by things that we've done. But I appreciate the panel being here this morning. You guys do great work on behalf of the taxpayers of our country, and you've got a tough job to make this all happen. And our role is to, again, try to not money more to quarterback too much, but at least try to help us understand so that we can communicate back to our the folks who pay all our salaries that you're doing the best job you can with the resources you've got. And so if there's no other comments, again, thank you very much for being here this morning. This hearing's adjourned.